Eze Onyekpere. He is the lead director of the Center for Social Justice. He joins us now. You're very welcome.
My pleasure.
Good morning, Eze.
Good morning.
Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you're in a solar mood.
Yes, we are. But you see, because of the way the things are in the country, I really don't know whether Nigerians will celebrate. But let's go to it now.
Okay. Nigerians have a way of celebrating no matter what happens. That's just
suffering and smiling.
Suffering and smiling. Anyway,
right,
Eze, let's start by looking at this issue. The tariffs increased last week, and 300%. Your initial thoughts?
Let me start by saying that what is happening for me is not totally unexpected because of the mindset of the administration and the leadership. And it also boils down to the issue of leadership, sectoral leadership. If you want to have a minister for X, we should be able to find out what his antecedents, what opinions and views he holds, or what experiences he has in that sector, before you trust him or her on the sector. And you recall that there was a time people were saying the president should designate the appropriate ministries, each of the designates we are going to handle, so that they will be properly grilled by the National Assembly on that subject before they are approved or not. Now, coming down to this, there has been allegations that subsidy for the sector has hit over 3 trillion. And so the federal government said, well, we want to reduce the subsidy. You recall during the Buhari days, they were talking about service reflective tariff, as distinct from what we hear today, cost reflective tariff. Now, if you look at the increase, I mean, if you have to go and buy credit today, you're almost paying 240 if you add the VAT and everything for 1 unit, what you were doing 68 naira before. Now, if you look at it, it is far beyond what NEC itself said under the multi-year tariff order, the supplementary order they produced in April 2024. They said the cost-reflective tariff for 1 unit is 180.2 naira. 180.2. So the argument is that government wants to reduce the subsidy they are paying from about 3.13 to about 1.4 thereabout. And they now singled out a certain class of people and said they are band A. So from 180, which is even what they call the cost-reflective tariff, they moved it to 225, which is almost 240 by the time you add VAT and everything. Now, why single out a certain section of Nigerians to bear the whole burden that will reduce the so-called subsidy being paid by government by almost 60-something%? Under what law or under what policy framework is this being done? I've read the new Electricity Act. I can't find the basis for this. Yes, there's a question of cross-subsidy, which in the jurisprudence and literature of the power sector is always there. Yes, those who are so well-to-do can subsidize the poorer segment somehow. But it is not at this level. To multiply what somebody was paying by almost 4, and then far above what you call the cost-reflective tariff. But I have a challenge with this idea of cost-reflective tariff, which the so-called experts in the sector have been pushing to our face. Because nobody has sat them down to interrogate them, because I like seeing those who complexify issues, bringing them to show them that there is nothing technical or complex about what they're doing. They're simply being incompetent. Cost-reflective tariff means the cost of an efficient producer, distributor of electricity. We cannot be talking about the cost of an inefficient electricity producer, or the one who wheels it across, transmits it, or the one who distributes it. For instance, if you look at the aggregate technical and commercial losses, which NEC fixed at about 30-something% or so, or thereabout, shouldn't even be up to that. Many of them are exceeding that. Many of them are doing 40, 50. Many of them are simply wasting the energy. So they are not efficient generators. Neither do they wheel efficiently, and neither do they distribute efficiently. So what people are being asked to pay in that idea of cost-reflective tariff is inefficient distributors, inefficient generation, inefficient wheeling it down to where the distribution will take it from. So I would have preferred this idea that we are talking about before, about service reflective tariff. The service you get should be reflected in your tariff. Now, come to think of it. If you do this and you think you've succeeded and you say you are taxing, let's say you are taxing the rich more than the poor, that's not true. Factories, commercial businesses, producers and service providers, which are producing goods and services in the economy, which are employers of labor, are among this so-called band A that have to pay more. So if I'm producing bread, for instance, and the input, one of the critical inputs, which is power, the price is increased, what do? I increase the price of my bread. If it's the factories in Lagos or Abuja, you are asking them literally to increase, you have increased their cost of production, so the unit cost will definitely increase. Even hospitals, major big hospitals are all in bad A. Major big hospitals are there. Now what do? National Hospital. We are talking about the cost of medical services, which is beyond the poor. There is no middle class anymore. It's either you are rich, very rich, or you are dead poor. So when you charge hospitals, increase the tariff that they are going to, they're even finding it difficult to pay the normal tariff. What do you think will happen? If the cost of surgery used to be, say, 30, 40,000 for hernia, they increase it. You don't expect them. What are they supposed to do? So at the end of the day, these things don't add up. And most importantly, I received, from where I live in Abuja, I received the text of the increase on Wednesday. I don't know whether they even waited for the minister to announce it before they sent me to my phone. If you want, I can show you. Now, I want to challenge Abuja Electricity Distribution Company to prove, because I have empirical evidence to prove that where I live, I have never, ever received 20 hours of electricity a day. And I dare say nobody in Nigeria receives that. If Asorok, where the president lives, is not on a dedicated line, if it is just the general line, all of us, and they say this is the president line, it will never receive 20 hours of electricity a day. The electricity in my house, they took the light. Since around 12, we came back from church after 12. I was on generator from that time up till when I left the house this morning. And this is the place I'm supposed to be enjoying 20 hours of electricity. From 12 yesterday in the afternoon up till a few minutes to 7 when I was leaving the house, there was no electricity.
You see, that's the worrisome trade. The scenario you've painted now is at the end of the day, it is those people in band Z, band Y, or band whatever
those bands
it is
don't
called.
make meaning.
They are the ones that are even paying, because by the time the companies increase the price of their products, it is also you and I that will go to purchase the product, and the purchasing power is not even there. The hospital you talked about, even UCH, you know, I'm not even sure they've restored the power
They
now.
have.
They're already owing so
Yes,
much
and
on
that
the
was
old
before,
tariff.
no,
On the old
that,
68
yes, on the
naira.
old system.
You know the interesting
you know?
thing, Nkoli? UCH is now saying that about an electricity distribution company overbilled them by 88 million naira.
That was before this increase. So you can imagine what that would do to patients and the amount, the bills they will pay at the end of the day. But Eze, let me take you to the point that the minister is talking about, because he seems to be saying that with this increase, power will be more stable. Those lapses you talked about will no longer be there. The grid will no
grid
longer
will not
collapse and
collapse.
all of that. So help us get a sense of how this removal of the so-called subsidy for Nigerians will
But I just
increase all of
told you
that.
that my house is supposed to be on bad A, that the last time I saw grid electricity was around after 12 or after 12 yesterday. And that since then up till now, everything that's been done in my house is my own generator, alternative power. Now, let me take you back a little bit, why I started with the leadership. If you recall, President Olusegun Obasanjo's administration built the power plants. And what was being said then a few months before he left was that they built power plants, forgetting to build the gas pipelines that will fuel those power plants. That was before 2007 May, when Obasanjo left power. With the power plants Obasanjo government built, Nigeria's installed capacity is in excess of 12,000 megawatts. Did you hear me? 12,000 megawatts. From Obasanjo's days up till now, yes, the gas pipelines have been built. The successive administrations have not been able to ramp up power production in terms of generation beyond 4,500 meters on good days. 4,500 megawatts. So installed capacity is in excess of 12,000. Now, if all these years nothing has been done, there is no empirical basis based on the minister's presentation as to show why this new money. It merely reduced the subsidy government will pay from about 3.1 million to about 1.4, 1.3. There is no empirical thing he said that shows how they will fire up and get the remaining about 8,000 megawatts up. Even if they were going to get it up, the grid can only carry about 5,500. Beyond that, it will collapse. The grid, those big power lines that take it from the generation points down to Abuja, down to Lagos, from where the disco step it down, cannot carry more than 5,500 megawatts. Meanwhile, we have an installed capacity of 12,000 megawatts. No, so what does that tell you? That it is beyond all the stories that the Jonathan administration did, Buhari administration did, and up till now, nothing has changed beyond what the Obasanjo government left. You know, sometimes people say, oh, this man built infrastructure, this one built. I tell them, I laugh. It's as if to say we are coming from the moon. We were all living here. I was an adult. I was already monitoring what government was doing during the Obasanjo's days. He laid a solid foundation, which most of the administrations that came after him could not. Even look at in terms of the soft infrastructure, EFCC, ICPC, pension reforms, telecoms. If we had had an administration that matched up in terms of bringing out ideas and moving, we could have moved forward. 12,000 megawatts capacity since Obasanjo's days. We are still firing 3,000, 4,000.
Okay, Eze, a lot of issues there. The Obasanjo power project then in 2007. Incidentally, I visited a few of those sites, and some of the problems even exceed what you talked about. Some of the turbines were so big that and so heavy that Nigerian roads will collapse under them. And
but they eventually found a way to bring them in.
They found a way around them.
Just like the Dangote power refinery.
Those were the things that slowed down the process of ensuring that these things went on stream.
Can that be an excuse almost 20 years thereafter?
Now, Eze, my problem now is this. You've described a situation where government is not looking at power that is delivered to the people, but looking at the costs.
Yes.
Of
the inefficient costs. Not the actual cost if very efficient providers were doing the business.
Okay. Now, the argument has been that, look, government does not have any business doing business, and government wants to take its hands off any kind of subsidy so that there can be more money for other projects, infrastructure, and all of that. And power, incidentally, is a key infrastructural component. But I'd like to do a comparison. I'd like you to do a comparison for us. Is this what applies everywhere else? Because I see the argument that, look, we don't want to have anything to do with these things. Let the private sector handle it, and then government will have more money to do stuff.
No, let me start from wind back a bit. When the Abacha presidency removed a few pennies from fuel subsidy, they started what is called what? PTF, right? Mm-hmm. Which the former president handled on their behalf.
Yes.
Muhammadu Buhari.
Yes, the Petroleum Trust Fund.
Yes. People were a bit critical of what they were doing, say they took most of the projects to one part of the country, but those projects are in Nigeria. So we saw what they did. When Jonathan removed a little pennies after all the gra that were made in Ojota and all the places, what happened? He set up Shore P to invest the proceeds. At least we saw a few buses, we saw a few roads constructed. When President Bola Ahmed Tinubu from Ego Square thundered that subsidy is gone, what has he set up? If the argument is that you free up resources for infrastructure, have we seen where those monies are going? Is there any special vote for education, social services? Is there any special one for health? Power is supposed to be one of the infrastructure. We are now supposed to save from fuel subsidy, and the money we save by floating the naira and investing. So why are you removing the little? It is a lie that government has no business in business. Government is the chief business person. Go and look at section 16 of your constitution. It talks about managing the national economy in a way and manner to make sure that the welfare of the people is taken up, to make sure that we have happiness in the country, to make sure that the means and factors of production are not concentrated in a few hands. That's there in the constitution. So even in Europe and America, where we usually like to ape what they're doing, they have heavy subsidies for their farmers. They have heavy subsidies in a lot of areas. So it depends on every country to decide what they have to subsidize. So it is a lie that if in other parts of the world that government does not subsidize one thing or the other. So you look at your comparative advantage. You look at your factors of production, and things that will help you produce enough goods and services, especially the tradable ones. That things that will also help you to build up your human capacity, and you see what subsidy you can give. So anybody who is telling you that in other countries, there's no subsidy, that's a lie. That's not true.
Okay, so Eze, let's look at this issue again, because I'm going back to the minister's briefing and the things he said. I have mentioned it in a couple of media briefings that it is because of government sensitivity to the pains of our people that we will not make us migrate fully into a cost-reflected tariff or remove subsidy 100% in the power sector like it was done in the oil and gas sector. So my question is government really, I don't know, what is it about subsidy for the people that government is not comfortable with? I've heard an analysis by one analyst who said that the only thing that pains government is when the people enjoy some kind of subsidy in any sector. But when it comes to every other frivolity, they are very comfortable with that.
Yeah, so that's the critical challenge. Even the subsidies that they removed in petroleum sector, if it had been properly managed, we wouldn't be discussing this. What has happened is that when you remove subsidy and leave the money floating, you create opportunities like all the kind of things you hear in the National Assembly. You must drive 160 million naira SUV, you must pad budgets, and then all these ones you are seeing in the National Assembly is because it's easier for us to see what they're doing. It's more open and transparent. In the ministries, the ministers, you can be sure they're all driving 3-4 SUVs, and that's not even an issue. So you bring out more resources, okay, for those at the top corridors of power to share rather than investing it. You knew recently the salaries of the judges were also increased to about 3.5 million minimum. So if you can do these things all in a jiffy, why is it taking forever to conclude the minimum wage negotiation, to move people away from 30,000 naira? You've increased electricity tariff, you've increased cost of food, you've increased cost of electricity, you've increased virtually everything.
Cost of cooking gas.
Cooking gas. Because people were also migrating. We have stories about that you can now run your generator on cooking gas, the petrol generators, and that is cheaper. I mean, I tried it a couple of days ago, changed the carburetor. I'm not finding anything tangibly different as much. There isn't so much in terms of difference. So when you block all the loopholes of where people can easily survive and be a little bit happy, I don't know what the expectation is from the government. So there is nothing in our laws that says government should not subsidize. Part of why fuel subsidy became so unpopular was not the fuel subsidy per se. It was the corruption part of fuel subsidy. 2 ships came in, which can be recorded, their movement to Nigeria, and somebody brought papers and said there were 4 ships. So instead of paying subsidy for 2 cargoes, 2 full ship cargoes, you now pay for 4. I think that's what discredited why everybody at some point was saying, but the government was in a position to stop it. You saw all the probes during the Jonathan era, the one they did in the National Assembly, the one Imokode committee did. Nobody implemented those reforms. People were indicted who brought papers, just papers, and said there's a ship here. But ships have a registry, how they move. If a ship leaves Apapa and is heading to maybe a wharf in Britain or anything, there is a movement. There's a register at any given point in time. So you can't simply produce documents and people believe you, unless those who are producing the documents who don't want to do their work, or their party in sharing whatever you get out of it, they go behind and you share it. So nobody implemented that. That's what gave fuel subsidy a very bad name, not the actual subsidy, because the actual subsidy was less than 50% what was being claimed. And what was being claimed, what the actual subsidy is not something so big that the government cannot afford to pay.
This was a question I put to one of our guests last week. I can't quickly recall who it was, but I remember asking that question. Is it easier to remove subsidy or
to
fight corruption? Because when you look at history, Nigerian history, as far back as 1970s, when the military government ordered cement from all over the world, the Nigerian government, according to what was recorded in the newspapers, paid for a lot more cement than it actually received. Same thing in the Second Republic, when the Shagari administration gave import licenses for rice. The same thing happened. Now we are having the same situation with petroleum products. Why is it so difficult to tackle the corruption rather
than allowing the
people to suffer?
That's the central question people in civil society have been asking, and in the media, to say it will be easier, okay, to tackle corruption. Get the people, if the political will is there. If the political will is there, like I did tell you, all those issues I brought 10 ships, they are easy to locate from a central registry. It's not rocket science. Look at what is even happening beyond the petrol subsidy. Look at what is happening in the Delta in terms of oil theft. Now we have a scenario under the PIA. Our local oil producers are under legal obligation to supply crude oil, satisfy local demand for crude oil to the small refineries we've gotten here. But they're not doing that. You know, today Dangote is importing crude from the US. So even in terms of articulation, whatever we thought we would have benefited from local production, refining of petrol, all right, in terms of foreign exchange, could possibly be wiped out by the quantum, because it's not getting it here. All beyond the first 2 shiploads that NNPC gave, all that he's been doing since is gotten from the US. So you start refining at home, you can't find crude oil in Nigeria. And there is evidence that we have so much in reserves. You are importing crude oil to refine.
Yeah, well, so, the futures were sold for the $3 billion
there's no question of futures. We are discussing what Nigerian law says. Mm-hmm. The PIA says you must satisfy the local demand of local refiners before you begin to export. Why are you even selling your crude oil in advance to go and collect money so that you can deal with today's problems? When tomorrow comes, how will that generation raise money, or those people raise money to run their government? So we're already indebted. And the law is clear. You don't borrow to pay salaries. You don't borrow to buy SUVs. You don't borrow for recurrent expenditure. Now, if you go to the budget, those SUVs bought by legislators, they're grading it as capital. But is that really the kind of capital expenditure we are thinking about? So the law says borrow only for capital expenditure or human development. So they're expecting that the more you borrow, the philosophy is that the more you borrow, the more you increase your productive capacity. And if you increase your productive capacity, you produce more, which could likely be exported to give you foreign exchange. Or the companies that are producing it increase their capacity to produce and pay more corporate income tax to the government. So as you borrow, your revenue is supposed to increase to put you in a position at the payback time to be able to comfortably pay back. But here in Nigeria, the more we borrow, the less we are in a position to finance the repayment of the debt. We need to borrow to refinance already due debt so that or begin to beg to have a better accommodation. If it was a 10-year debt, so okay, spread it over 20 years for us. So that's the critical challenge. It is a governance question. And the earlier Nigerians begin to confront these issues. And that brings us back. All these things are connected. Votes have consequences. And what is happening today is a consequence of how we voted, whether the elections were rigged or manipulated, what the courts do. Votes have consequences. And there's no better way to figure this out than what has happened in the last 8 to 9 months.
So this is the consequences of our votes. Anyway, we'll come back to this discussion, but we need to take a quick break because at this time on the program, we take Nigerians to the social media space to look at how, issues are happening. We're taking a break from this discussion, but we will definitely come back to it after the social media segment. So it's time to go to Kakaki Socials now, and we will be inviting the anchor of that media space because this issue we're discussing is also one of the very big stories there.
I think the minister was saying the right thing at the wrong time, because the proper thing is that people should be encouraged to manage the electricity tariff, in such a way that it doesn't create a hole in their pocket. So that's the advice. If you're going out, make sure you turn off the light and all
okay,
that stuff.
Eze, you will wrap up on with us. Eze Onyekpere is still here with us, talking about the electricity hike. That's the tariff hike, and then what Nigerians are saying about it and what needs to be done. So going back to our earlier discussion, but I need to ask one question, really. What is the place of privatization in this power sector in the first place? And is there any need to revisit that privatization? I'm asking this because if you also listen to the minister, he did say that Nigeria is experiencing a subsidy pricing regime where a large portion of the generation, transmission and distribution cost is still being paid by government, formerly at 67% of the cost, and then the government would have paid 2.9 trillion naira for 2024 if this increase was not effected.
Well, it was a fair privatization program because we've privatized generation, we've also privatized distribution, but the transmission is still in the hands of government. If you recall privatization jurisprudence, it talks about getting a core investor who has the technical capacity, maybe may have managed a power plant before a distribution company, so he has his technical experience. He has managerial capacity as well. And most important of all, he has financial capacity to invest and turn around the fortunes of the privatized enterprise. But unfortunately, during the privatization of the discos, most of the people who bought them have little or no experience. They had no experience about running such a business before. And many of them were straw men and women who were politically connected, who went to the banks to borrow the cost of paying the money they were charged by the government. So if you go and borrow to pay, say, 10 billion, being the cost of taking over a disco, and you still needed to invest 100 billion to make it functional, and you are finding it difficult to pay back that cost of acquisition, then that's where the problem started, because the privatization is a failed one. Although in these discos, government still retained a certain percentage, they didn't sell everything. So that's why they're still like carrying the can, paying whatever they call the subsidy for the inefficiencies of these companies, as well as still investing money. If you look at the budget of the Rural Electrification Agency, government is still investing money, doing the last mile, moving electricity from one community to the other. As soon as government finishes, they walk away. The discos come and start collecting tariff. I mean, look at it. You are a businessman. Somebody comes and invests, and as soon as he comes to invest, he moves away, and then you start collecting tariff, and you are still complaining. So these discos are inefficient. The whole system is inefficient, and what we need is people who are very knowledgeable in the system. Particularly now, the National Assembly has passed the new Electricity Act, which allows state governments. So it's no longer on that exclusive list, they say, federal government alone. State governments can now invest. So this is something that state governors should take up the challenge. It's not just enough for them to be mouthing, we want to do it. The federation is too much tilted towards the center. Now they have the opportunity. They can do the kind of thing that we have in Aba today where, you have this system, it's just targeted for a small community. And if you manage it well, you reduce the cost, and then everybody's happy.
It's about, electricity infrastructure is something that demands long-term funding,
yes.
which was what Dr. Sam Amadi was talking about on Kakaki on Friday.
Agreed.
When he tried to explain to Nigerians why the privatization process didn't go as it should have gone. My own deduction from that intervention was that it was faulty.
Yeah.
And
I say so.
that's why there's been no new investments in generation and distribution, which was what should have happened really. But you now talked about the possibility of having state governments get into the power sector.
Do you need new investments when you have 12,000 megawatts capacity? What does it take to fire those plants to now deliver? The difference between 12 and 4,000 we are doing is 8,000 megawatts.
Yes, Eze. I said that because, one, you needed to expand capacity in terms of transmission. If you've expanded capacity to 12,000 megawatts, when you talk about generation, you need to expand capacity. Talking about transmission, you need to expand capacity for distribution as well, and that obviously hasn't been done. But with the way things are, we're still going to talk about how state governments
can come in.
Treat funding that comes to them. Not very many state governments have proved to their people that they can handle these projects, because funding for such projects could become a challenge too. So do you see state governments being able to step into the power sector anytime soon to ease this burden on the people?
If they manage the resources available to them well, they can. And also there is a need to open up the space to bring in more new investors, okay? So that it's not just a question of one or two people who don't have the capacity going to be there. I'm dreaming of a model where you don't just need one person or one big company. In the part of Nigeria I come from, in the southeast, all the electricity we have in our villages, we paid for them. The little one in my community, I knew in my own day, in my own little way, how much I spent. And I knew how many young men like me put in. We had young men come in and buy a transformer. Then, in those days, 3.5 million, 4 million. I don't know how much it costs now. So that shows you that the capacity. You see, when you say you want an investor and you are looking for 100 billion and you are looking only for one person to bring it, or 2 or 3 or 4 people to bring it, you've knocked us out. If you open up the space, people like me and you can afford $1 million, 2 or 3 investment in these power companies like any other company quoted on the stock exchange. And when you raise that money, you can now move. It is not just to look for only one big person carrying a big briefcase, or one big alhaji, or one big chief, or one big somebody to say, go and bring the money. That is the problem. And for people like me and you to trust, even buy shares and bring money, there must be transparency. I am not convinced that the discos have actually opened up on the amount of money they are collecting. You know, they're the ones that fund the entire value chain. It's the money they collect from us as customers that is used to settle both transmission and generation.
Yes.
So they've not come clean of how much they've been taking in terms of their collection. Because when they said before that they were paying subsidy of 3 trillion, I was wondering, before this recent increase, in my own little world, I used to do 100,000 in my small house, which in the morning, the family moves away. Myself, my wife, the children, everybody moves away. And we all return after 7 to 8. So even if they bring light, most of the times they don't bring, we are using electricity. It's in the night mainly, and maybe on weekends. So when I hear that, that is not enough. And I don't know how many Nigerians are like me, and I'm not a rich person. I'm just managing my life. So when I hear the little money they say they collect, I just imagine, I ask myself, are there not up to 1 million Nigerians who used to pay that tariff I was paying? If there were up to 1 million of them paying 100,000, and then I do my maths, it doesn't add up. So what I'm saying is that they need to come clean. Once the system is transparent, once the system is run like any other power company, people will go and buy shares in those companies. Look at the Geregu power company that Otedola took over. People are investing. I think it's on the stock exchange now. If he wants money, it's going to be easier for him to raise that money transparently in such a way that he can invest more. So that should be the way to go.
All right.
Okay.
That should be the way to go. Okay, valid points from our guest this morning, talking about how best we can actually improve our power generation in the country and distribution, and also not stifle Nigerians with removal of subsidy on the electricity sector. Thank you so much for your time, and your thoughts are quite insightful there. Do have a great day, sir.
Thank you.
All right, Eze Onyekpere, who is the head director of Center for Social Justice, has joined us